Sarah sat in the college principal's office, feeling heavy thoughts clutching at her chest. Outside the windows of New York City, life was as vibrant as ever. Far away from here, thousands of kilometers away, remained her home village and the world she had once known. Here, in this huge city, she felt at once part of something big and a small cog in a complex machine. Her gaze was fixed on the window, but her thoughts wandered far away. "Well, what are you going to decide?" came the principal's voice, which broke her silence. Sarah turned slowly, looking at the older man who was her mentor. His face was calm, but he read concern in his eyes. He knew what she was going through. He was the one who was helping her adapt to this difficult world. "I don't know," she said quietly, feeling her words feel like they were stuck somewhere inside. She couldn't find a simple explanation for everything that was happening in her life. She couldn't explain why her mother had left so early, why it was so hard to let go of the past. The headmaster leaned back gently in his chair, looking at her with understanding. He knew how hard it was to decide to take such a step, especially at her age. Everything she was thinking about right now wasn't about typical teenage problems like the rest of them. She'd always been different. Other kids dreamed of parties, entertainment, and social media, but she dreamed of something bigger, a future that she didn't think was for everyone. "Sarah, you're a smart girl, and I think you understand a lot of things," the headmaster said, his voice stern but warm at the same time. "You know that not everyone can just leave school like that. You realize that medicine is no joke, don't you? It's not just a job. It's hard work that requires all your strength, determination, and a lot of responsibility. Are you sure you want to go into it?" Sarah sighed, lowering her eyes. All her thoughts were centered on her mother, who hadn't had time to see her daughter grow up. Her mother's death from heart disease had left a void in her soul that nothing could fill. Sarah was the only child in the family, and her entire childhood was about making sure her mom didn't feel alone. Now that her mom was gone, she felt she had to carry on her work so that she didn't go in vain. "I can't just be a nurse," she replied, raising her head. "I have to become a doctor. I have to help people so that others don't have to go through what I went through. My mom left so early, and I can't just forget about it. I want to save lives." The headmaster was silent, his gaze calm. He understood that this wasn't just a decision, not a simple desire. It was a need. It was her own endeavor, her duty. "Have you thought about it? Going to medical school is a big step. You will study all your life. There will be no rest, no entertainment, no personal life. Your whole life will be study, hospitals, hard work. Few people can withstand such a load." Sarah didn't answer immediately. Her thoughts went back to her mother. She remembered how her mother used to tell her stories about how hard it was to work as a doctor, how much she had to study. But there was always pride in those stories. Mom's pride in her profession, in her knowledge, in the help she could give to others. And Sarah wanted to be like that, strong, knowledgeable, able to make a difference in the world. "I'm ready," she said, looking confidently into the headmaster's eyes. "I know it's going to be hard, but I'm ready. My mother left because she wasn't saved, and I don't want other people to go through what I went through. That's my goal. This is my path." The headmaster nodded quietly. He couldn't help but respect her determination, despite the gravity of her choice. She was strong, and he knew it. "I hear you," he said, getting up from the table. "You're good. You understand a lot already." He went to the shelf, took out a folder and carefully unfolded it, showing the girl the documents. "I promise you that I'll help you with housing. You'll go to medical school, and next year you'll get a place in a dormitory. We'll make sure you can focus on your studies. You deserve that. And beyond that, if you can do anything you want." Sarah felt something inside her let go, like she'd finally taken an important step. A step that would open up a new world for her. A new world where she would have the opportunity to save lives, change destinies, and perhaps prevent tragedies like her own. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I won't let you down." The director smiled. "Believe in yourself, Sarah. You will succeed." He shook her by the shoulder, and she stood up, leaving the office, feeling her heart beat faster. This was a start. She felt like she had a chance now. A chance at a new life, a chance for other people, a chance she couldn't pass up. When she stepped outside, the bright lights of New York City surrounded her, and despite all the hustle and bustle, Sarah felt that now she knew where she was going. Her mother had not gone in vain. She had been her inspiration. She continued to live on in her memory, in her determination. Her journey was only the beginning. Nina sat on an old wooden chair in her small apartment in Barcelona, looking at the photograph that had long ago become for her a symbol of loss and disappointment. In the photograph, elderly and tired, sat her husband Nicholas alone, with an empty glass in his hand. As she looked at the photo, his eyes reflected the years he had spent struggling with himself, with a world that seemed increasingly alien to her. From time to time he left her alone with her dreams and her only solace, a job in an ice cream factory where she felt a little needed. When Nina left for Barcelona, she still believed she could start again. Her elderly parents in her home village assured her that life would be better here in the big city. She really hoped for the best. But, as often happens, reality was much harsher than her dreams. In Barcelona, the factory was waiting for her, a job that was hard but at least stable. Sometimes she longed to go back to her hometown, to those quiet days in the meadow, where there were no such difficult decisions, no need to break herself. It was here, in Barcelona, that she met Nicholas. He was young and charming. As it seemed to her at the time, he was an escape from the dull existence, from the daily routine in the factory, from the loneliness that increasingly filled her life. In the beginning, everything had been wonderful. Nicholas was kind, cheerful, with a gift for coaxing and cheering up. They often strolled along the seafront, his laughter loud and infectious, and she believed that this laughter was her future. He wasn't like all the other men in the factory, who complained about their lives and sat for hours over a glass of beer. Nicholas was alive, full of hope. Everything melted inside her when he suggested she start a new life. The life she'd always wanted. A life filled with light and promise. But after a few months, it all went wrong. At first, Nicholas was indeed a wonderful companion, but the further she got, the harder it became to hide his flaws. At night his laughter changed to swearing, and his love to empty promises. She had heard him leave late at night, returning in the morning smelling of cheap wine, eyes full of frustration. But she didn't want to believe it. She was too much in love to see it at once. It was all like a fog she would walk into before she realized when it happened. "Nina, are you still wondering what it's going to be like with this baby?" Nicholas asked, somehow quietly, after she told him the happy news. Her heart beat faster. Like in an old film, she was standing at the window, and he was sitting on the sofa with a glass in his hands. She expected him to be happy, joyful, and perhaps light-hearted. But he only looked at her in silence, a shadow of that old discontent that was beginning to show more and more often in his eyes. "Are you not glad?" she asked, trying to hide the growing concern in her voice. "It's our baby. You always said you wanted to have a family." "No, Nina, I'm not ready. We're too young." He stopped talking, lowering his eyes. "I don't want a baby now. We have to think about our future, about us. Think about giving up this baby." Those words sounded like a thunderclap. She felt something in her chest tighten, like a lump she couldn't swallow. Nicholas, the one she loved, the one who had been her rock, was suddenly a stranger. He talked about life, about the future, but not her future, not their child's future. "Are you crazy?" she exclaimed, unable to believe her ears. "Are you suggesting that I have an abortion? You, who assured me that we would be together forever." Nicholas clenched his fists, but didn't say anything. He was clearly in some kind of trap that his own life had driven him into. This moment was the first time in their relationship that she had truly felt his weakness. He wasn't the man to stand by her side, to protect and love. There was no longer the spark in his eyes that had attracted her so much. "I won't do it," Nina said, her voice hard. "You realize I can't do that, I won't. I'm going to have this baby. If you don't want to be with me, then leave, but I won't give up this life." Nicholas was silent. He didn't know what to say. He could have said something like, "You don't understand what I'm going through," or "I'm not ready for this," but instead he just sat there, looking at her with some strange expression on his face, and quietly repeating that things were going to be difficult. A few days later they were married. The marriage was quick, almost forced, but Nina still hoped that love would prevail. She still believed that something could be fixed, that they could go back to the bright days they had spent together when everything had seemed possible. On the day of the wedding, her mother, who was in the village, sent her a letter. Nina didn't open it for a long time. When she finally unsealed the envelope, she read the words that are forever etched in her memory. "My dear Nina, I have always believed that you are intelligent and strong. But be careful of this man. He is not what you think he is. Time will tell how your life will turn out. I'm asking you to think about it, take your time. Don't marry him. Listen to your heart. It will tell you." Those words echoed in her head on her wedding day. She didn't say anything, of course. She only smiled as she left the house with him. But her heart was filled with anxiety like never before. She had taken this path because she believed there would be happiness at the end. Life with Nicholas had become hard. He continued to drink, and each day seemed more burdensome to her than the last. Nina still worked in the factory to provide for them both, and he drifted more and more into his habits. Her life began to seem like nothing but a long wait for something to bring her back. But it wasn't happening. It wasn't the relief she'd been waiting for. Nicholas was not a good husband. More and more often he went away for a few days to spend time with friends, and then came back with an empty wallet and promises that didn't come true. He asked her for money for beer, for the next important purchases, but Nina no longer believed in his promises. She gradually realized that her life with him would not be what she had imagined. When she found out she was pregnant again, her world simply turned upside down. Sarah, her only daughter, was born. But she didn't rejoice. Instead, her face was covered in sadness. She realized that her child's future would be complicated, that she would have to fight for each new day. Nicholas, when he found out, was again not happy. There was no happiness in his eyes, just another fear and depression. He didn't even ask how she was feeling when she brought him the news. It was another disappointment for Nina, who realized that her life with this man was in vain. They soon decided to get married, so as not to embarrass themselves in front of society. The wedding was simple and almost without emotion. Everything was as usual, Nicholas in his sullen state, she, in search of what she could once call happiness. But with each passing year, things only got worse. Nina sat on the edge of the bed, her gaze fixed on the empty space, her mind spinning with many thoughts. The rooms were quiet, the kind of quiet that happens in those moments when all the pain and frustration comes up and huddles around you. The baby was asleep in the next room, and Nina seemed like she might be relieved. But there was no relief, no soothing. Everything was too loud, too heavy, too hopeless. Her relationship with Nicholas had long since become a painful daily routine. She'd tried to turn a blind eye to his drinking, to his leaving for days at a time, to his silent aggression that grew stronger with each passing month. But with the arrival of the baby, everything changed. Sarah was born into the world, and with that came a host of new worries and hopes. She was her light, her only salvation. And Nina was ready to fight for her daughter, even if it meant standing up to her own husband. But every day, every hour with Nicolaus shattered her faith that she could hold her family together. One morning, when Sarah was still very young, Nina struggled to get out of bed. Everything was too heavy. Nicholas had left again, as always, without warning. His whole rhythm of life was connected to this. Days of silence, full of despair, and nights full of furious words and recriminations. But now, with her daughter in her arms, Nina realized that she could no longer go on living like this. She realized that she couldn't be weak, that she couldn't let herself lose her strength, because now there was someone in the world who needed her. But Nicholas wasn't giving her any other option. He continued to drink, lost his job, began to hide his problems deeper and deeper. Nina tried talking to him, tried to win him back, but there was no answer. His face always became stony, and his eyes became blank. He didn't even try to change his life, didn't even try to help in any way. He just stayed in his shadow, hiding behind alcohol, behind little deceptions. One evening, coming home after work, Nina noticed that the door was unlocked. She felt her heart clench, then quietly walked over to the room. He was sitting there in the dark, with an empty glass in his hands. She looked at his sad face, but something inside her was already broken. "You didn't come home again," Nina said, feeling her voice shake. Nicholas didn't answer. He only shrugged inside. It was all he could give her, emptiness. He didn't realize that his inaction was poisoning their lives. He couldn't see how his wife was being squeezed by pain with each passing day, how she was losing her strength trying to keep this crumbling house going. "Do you realize we can't go on like this?" Nina asked, approaching him. "Do you realize that I can no longer be there for you as you continue to destroy yourself?" He looked up but said nothing. His face was blank, and Nina realized that she could no longer wait for change. She felt that her patience, her hope, it had all evaporated like smoke. He couldn't understand how important it was for her to be strong for her daughter. He couldn't realize that this was the last moment she could do anything. "I'm leaving, Nicholas. I can't take it anymore." Nina said the words, and with every sound they distanced her from him. He sat silently, not trying to hold her. He didn't say a word, but Nina realized that his silence was an answer. It was an answer she had expected, but didn't believe in. She felt her heart clench, but at the same time, she felt her soul grow lighter. The next day she filed for divorce. It was a difficult decision, but she had no choice. She knew that if she stayed, she would die. She knew her daughter didn't deserve to grow up in this hell. Every now and then she wanted to go back, but every time she remembered his eyes full of abyss, she knew she couldn't. She couldn't afford to go back. After a few weeks, as the situation with Nikolaus became more and more dangerous, Nina decided to go into labor. She realized that she needed to start a new life, and that she would have to go through pain, through loneliness to do so. But she was ready. As she held her baby daughter in her arms when Sarah first came into the world, she felt her heart fill with something new. It wasn't just love, it was salvation. Sarah was her new life, her new chance. She looked at her daughter and realized that everything she had done before was for her. But it wasn't all that simple. There was something inside Nina that kept her from being completely happy. She was broken. She was scarred. She had lost so much that it was hard to find the strength for a new beginning. Every day, every time she looked at her daughter, she realized more and more that she couldn't go back to her old life, but neither could she walk away from the pain she carried with her. And so, when she came home with little Sarah in her arms, she realized that this step was her life. It was her only way forward. She was ready for it. But Nicholas, as always, stayed behind in her shadow. Her heart was broken, but she knew she had to be strong now for her daughter's sake. Sarah had raised Nina, but her soul was still empty. Every day she felt herself drifting further and further away from the happiness she once had, from the life she could have built. But things were different now. Sarah was her light, her salvation, and that salvation had become her only meaning. But Nicholas was no longer a part of her life. He had become a ghost of the past, a shadow she tried to forget. Sarah sat on the edge of her bed in the small dorm room, feeling the first cold autumn wind creeping through the window. Everything around her was new city, new life, new possibilities. Her heart beat a little faster than usual because she realized this was the moment when everything changed. This moment was her chance at a new life. A chance she had waited so long for. A chance she couldn't miss. It had been a few months since Sarah had moved to Barcelona to attend medical school. When she first set foot on this land, she felt excitement. But what excited her most was not the study itself, but the possibility of starting over. It wasn't just a decision, it was fate's demand. In Barcelona, in this noisy and colorful city, she hoped to find her way. But she didn't think that this path would be so complicated and so full of unexpected encounters. The first week in the hostel was tough. Sarah was getting used to a new environment, new people. But that wasn't the hardest part. The weight of the past was weighing on her soul, her life with Nikolaus, her lost dreams, her broken heart. In the beginning, it had seemed impossible for her to forget. But with each day, with each step, Sarah became more and more convinced that she could build her life anew, one step at a time. Except that her inner world was not yet ready to let go of her past. The words that Nicholas had once said to her still echoed in her head. You won't make it. He didn't believe in her, and that was his biggest mistake. She was ready to prove to herself and everyone else that she could. She could be strong and independent. She could make her own destiny. Within a week, Sarah had already found her first job. In the evenings, after her college classes, she took a part-time job at a cafe near her dormitory. She didn't complain about the hard work. On the contrary, she felt a special satisfaction in it. Every day she tried to get stronger, despite the constant thoughts of how much easier it would be if she could just forget. But this process was inevitable. She had to let go. She had to move forward. And then, one evening as she walked home after work, her eyes met his. Andrew. He was standing on the corner, next to a coffee shop, discussing something with a friend. Sarah noticed him at once. He was different from everyone else. Not too bright, but with some inner strength, with a charisma that attracted. He laughed, and his laugh was warm and genuine, so rare in this cruel world. He noticed her. His gaze was confident, yet soft, as if he knew she was feeling this moment too. She paused for a moment, feeling her heart twitch. She couldn't believe this was happening again. She was meeting someone who could become an important part of her life. He walked over and smiled. Hi, I'm Andre, he said, extending his hand. Sarah, she answered, feeling her heart beat a little faster. He laughed, but not obtrusively, but somehow lightly. It was a laugh that broke the heavy silence that had enveloped her for the past few months. Are you studying here? He asked, as if he didn't know what else to say. Yes, medical school, she answered, a little confused, but at the same time feeling her shoulders relax. It was as if something that had been lodged in her chest for a long time was finally starting to let go. They talked some more. About how hard studying was, about how hard it was to get used to a new city, about how great it was that there was at least some place where you could feel alive. Andre was easy to talk to, didn't ask too many questions, but his interest was genuine. Sarah realized that she wanted to meet him again. In the following days they began to meet more and more often. From time to time they walked around the city, went to cafes, chatted about life. Andre became her support. He didn't judge her, didn't try to drag stories about the past out of her. He was just there for her. That was important to her. He didn't demand anything, but he was there when she needed support. His words didn't comfort her, but his presence was comforting. With each new conversation with him, she began to realize how important such moments were to her. How important it was to be with someone who understood you, who accepted you as you were. He wasn't trying to change her, he wasn't trying to make her forget, but it was thanks to him that she was beginning to realize that the past wasn't something to carry around like a stone around your neck. The past should stay in the past. One day they were sitting in the park, on a bench, eating a lunch of sandwiches she had bought from the local bakery. Sarah felt truly alive for the first time. Andrew talked about something light, funny, something about his family, and she laughed. The laughter sounded from the heart, and suddenly she realized that her fears, her doubts, her sadness that she had been carrying around with her, were beginning to fade away. Andrew looked at her with a smile. "You know, you're not at all what you thought you were," he said. "You're strong, you just need to believe in yourself." Sarah looked into his eyes, and for the first time in a long time felt something inside her begin to change. Maybe she really could be strong, maybe she could be independent like she'd always dreamed. In these moments, next to Andre, she realized that her past, her mistakes, and the pain she had experienced no longer ruled her life. He became the person who opened for her a new way of looking at herself and the world. She realized more and more that her life depended solely on her. She could be whoever she wanted to be, and he was the pillar that helped her step forward. "Do you really believe that?" she asked, feeling her heart beat faster. "Of course I believe it, that I realized a long time ago that strong people aren't the ones who aren't afraid, they are those who can move forward despite their fear," Andrew answered. Sarah looked at him and felt her hands trembling slightly. She knew this moment would change her life. Everything was ahead of her. For the first time she felt like she could be happy. When he left for home, Sarah was left alone in the park, with this conversation going round and round in her head and her heart full. She was finally starting to feel alive, not a slave to her worries and frustrations, but a person who could truly control her own destiny. There was a new meaning to her life. As time passed, she and Andrew continued to develop their relationship, that he was there for her when she needed support, and when things were difficult for her, that he didn't demand anything from her, but he was always willing to help, that he was the one who made her life brighter and easier. And every day Sarah realized more and more that her ex-husband, his problems and mistakes were no longer what should define her life. Sarah realized that she now had the power to make her own destiny. With each step she felt more and more that she didn't have to depend on the past. All she had to do was believe in herself and move forward. When Sarah found out about her grandfather's will, she couldn't believe her ears. She stood in the notary's small office, her heart pounding in her chest like a hammer. This moment, when she was to hear that she was the sole heir to the flat she had dreamed of for so many years, which had become for her a symbol of stability and confidence in the future, had changed her life. But with that change came something else, an unimaginable heaviness that was beginning to squeeze her chest. Her thoughts immediately darted to Andre. He had been there for her, supporting her, but what would happen now? How would this affect their relationship, her place in the family? And most importantly, how would she now look into the eyes of all those who had been there for her when she wasn't, and who would probably consider her guilty for getting something she didn't deserve? "You deserve it," the notary's words still rang in her head. But would her achievements be easy for others to accept? Would it be easy for her to live with the knowledge that her own relatives might start looking at her as an enemy, as someone who had taken something away from them? Sarah stood in the dark corridor with her papers in her hands. There was an inescapable thought that her life, all the freedom and confidence she had gained over the last few months, would be jeopardized. And all because of one will. Andre was there, as always. He was holding her hand, but there was something new in his gaze too. He, like her, realized that what seemed simple and resolved could suddenly turn into a complex struggle. He stood beside her, but his face was tense. He remained silent, realizing that what mattered now was not how they felt, but what would happen next. Things were changing in their lives, and now they were facing a new challenge. "Don't worry," he said quietly, trying to reassure her. "We'll get through this together, that it's your destiny, and no one can take it away from you." But what if it wasn't? What if it won't be easy? What if her family, as they always do, prove too close to see her successes rather than her efforts? What if they don't understand? What if her former family doesn't accept her new status, her new opportunities, and starts to look at her as a stranger? Sarah couldn't sleep that night. Dozens of scenarios ran through her mind. How her family would react to her inheritance, how her life had changed over the past few months. Her thoughts kept returning to the problems she had left behind, the problems with her ex-husband, his drinking, his silence, the way she had left and taken her daughter with her. No one knew what she had gone through to be here today in this moment. And now that she had achieved what she wanted after all, she felt alone in this vast world. "You're so far away, Sarah," Andrew told her when they got home. "You keep thinking about things that didn't happen, but you're here, you made it. All you need to do now is move on. I'm with you." And yet Sarah couldn't shake this feeling of loneliness. She couldn't understand why, even though she had done everything right, she still felt like an outsider in her own world. Her family now saw her as a strange figure, as someone who had no right to happiness because she hadn't gone through the same struggles they had gone through. And now that her success was evident, her relatives may have felt that she had taken away what should have been theirs. They were due to meet Andrei's family soon. It was an important event, his sister's wedding, and Sarah felt a little like an uninvited guest. Despite all of Andrew's words that they would get through it, she still couldn't shake the feeling that she was going to be judged. Her complicated relationship with his sister, who hadn't yet accepted her as part of the family, only added to those feelings. Andrei's wedding to his sister had been business as usual, with lots of people, conversation, and alcohol, but for Sarah, every look, every gesture felt like a test. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was perceived as something alien here. She felt more and more how this change in her life was separating her from those around her. Andrew noticed her tension and tried to reassure her. "You mustn't think about what they might think," he said as they sat in the shade on the veranda. "This is your life, your destiny, and you can be proud of yourself. You deserve what you have." But how could she be proud when she felt that this place where she was supposed to feel part of something had actually become a place where her successes seemed alien, where her achievements only raised questions? That all changed when she and Andrei returned home. Their flat was cozy and filled with warmth, but Sarah couldn't free herself from her thoughts. Her life was once again divided. On the one hand, she knew that she had a chance for the future, that her attitude to life had changed. But on the other, it was all complicated by the multitude of people who didn't understand her path, her aspirations. A few days after the wedding, when the noise from the celebrations began to die down, Sarah received a call from a notary. Her grandfather's will, it turned out, had another feature. It contained conditions that put her in a difficult position. "You need to be prepared for things to be difficult," the notary said over the phone. "Not everyone in your family will be happy about this inheritance. Some may find it unfair." Sarah stood at the window, looking out over the city, and realizing that her world was changing again. She knew she would face a lot of hardships, a lot of people who would want to take it all back. But she also realized that she was willing to fight it. She can't go back to what she was. She can no longer be weak and dependent on other people's opinions. This is her life, her choice. "I'm ready," she said into the phone, feeling the confidence building in her chest. "I'm ready to fight for my future." Sarah sat in the armchair in her new flat, the one she had dreamed of for years. The room was cozy and warm, and the sun shone through the window in her spacious living room. In all this time, despite all the trials and difficulties, she had finally been able to feel at home. Here, in this flat, she felt more confident and at ease than ever before. It had been a long road to get to this point, and her heart still couldn't fully believe what had happened. Looking back on everything she had been through, Sarah realized how much pain and disappointment there had been in her life, but how much joy too. She had gone through hardships that would have broken anyone else, but not her. She had become strong. Everything she had been through had brought her to this moment, a moment where she stood on the threshold of a new beginning. She got a flat, a place she could call her own, and knew that now it would be her base for the next step. There was a job ahead. Work at medical school, work with patients, with those who needed so much help. But it wasn't just that that was important. What was important was that she herself was ready to take responsibility for her life and her future. Her dream career in medicine was just the beginning. Andrei, who had been by her side all this time, was sitting on the sofa in the same room. They enjoyed the silence together, the joy and the fact that finally all the failures, all the mistakes and obstacles were behind them. Despite all the obstacles, they were there for each other. Together. And even though this step, their new life, was just at the beginning, Sarah felt her heart fill with light. Andrew was her support, but most importantly, she had become a support for herself. She learnt to trust herself, her decisions, and most importantly, her heart. He was there for her, but she determined what her life would be like. And that was beautiful. "You won't regret choosing this path, Sarah," Andrew said, breaking the silence. He looked at her with a smile that always made her heart beat faster. "You're right," she replied, smiling back. "I've finally chosen my path, and it's my decision. I will follow it, ignoring the obstacles. I'm ready for it. And, now I believe it will all work out." Sarah looked into his eyes and felt his support give her strength. He had never tried to run her life. He'd been there for her, helped when she needed it, but he'd always respected her decisions. And there was something amazing about that. She didn't feel weak. She felt like a strong woman who could handle any hardship. It's been a few weeks. Sarah began her work at the medical school. Every day she became more and more immersed in her profession, in helping people. She felt her life taking on a new meaning. Everything she had experienced now seemed like a preparation for something more. Within these walls, among people who trusted her with their health, she found herself. With each patient, with each case, she became more confident in her choice. She no longer thought about the past. The past was part of her journey, part of her becoming. But it was no longer what defined her life. She didn't go back to it, didn't look back. Everything she needed for the future was in front of her eyes. She had no regrets. She had a new life, a new purpose. And so one day when she returned home, she found Andre at the table with a plan for their future. He held the documents in his hands, and she, raising her eyebrows, approached him. "What is this?" she asked, coming closer. "I thought it was time for us to think about the future," he replied, smiling. "Not just about your career. We should think about where we'll be in a few years. How about continuing to build our lives here in Barcelona? You feel like this is your home, don't you?" Sarah stopped. She stood looking at the papers. This was a new step, a new stage in their lives. She could have seen it as another obstacle, but instead she felt how this step was actually part of her and Andre's journey together. "You're right," she said, sitting down next to him. "We can always find ways to move forward. The important thing is that we're not alone. We are together." And in that moment, as they looked at each other, Sarah felt everything that had gone before, the pain, the disappointments, the doubts, finally go away. She was no longer a prisoner of her past. Now she had a future she could build on her own. She and Andrew had built that path together, and despite all the difficulties, they believed in their happiness. Sarah truly felt her life become stable. She felt her heart fill with new strength and energy. Difficulties became not obstacles, but steps that she was able to overcome. She wasn't afraid of change. She wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. Because now she knew she could handle anything. Soon, as she and Andrew prepared a plan for the next year together, she realized that everything was going to be okay. All she had to do was keep moving forward, keep believing in herself, and the changes she was creating in herself. Sarah was no longer the person who doubted herself. She became someone who builds her future with confidence, with a willingness to face new challenges, and with determination. Sarah's life was just beginning.